Welcome to the Art of Being Nimble podcast. I'm Glenn Smith and I'm your host. In this series, we'll introduce you to business leaders from around the world who will interview about how they've overcome challenges of operating a business in today's dynamic world. Through their stories, we're going to hear about what problems they've had and how they fixed them and the benefits it's brought them. Importantly, you're going to learn some lessons about what you can then use in your organisation to do similar things. So let's get on with the show and hear the next story. Today, we're diving into a story that's been making headlines in Switzerland, the controversial procurement of the F-35 fighter jet. On the surface, it's about defence, but underneath, it's a perfect case study of how traditional procurement can fail when the world around us is changing fast. To explore this, I'm joined by Mirko Kleiner, the co-founder of the Lean-Agile Procurement Alliance and a recognised pioneer in rethinking how organisations buy complex products and services. Mirko has spent nearly a decade helping governments and enterprises move away from lengthy, risk-adverse tendering processes towards faster, more collaborative approaches that deliver real outcomes. In this conversation, we look at what went wrong with the Swiss deal, why old procurement models keep setting buyers and suppliers up for failure, and how a lean, agile approach might have changed the story. So, Mirko, it's really great to have you with us. Before we get into talking about today's topic, I suppose it's useful just to take stock of where we are. When I think about procurement, it's really something that not everyone thinks about, but it can go wrong. But it's at the background of everything that we're doing. You know, major programs, public decisions, temp to scale, build anything. Procurement is embedded in everything that we do as an organization. But when it fails, things can go wrong. It can cost us money, it can delay us, and costs obviously can be a trust issue. It can slow us down, it slows our momentum. But sometimes it can be in the national news. And I know we're going to talk about an example of that happened in Switzerland. So maybe before we get into procurement and the challenges, maybe we should get your view on what you've observed of the F-35 procurement deal in Switzerland and how what you've observed of why there might be some challenges regarding that process.
Yeah. Hi, Glenn. Nice to be here with you together. And looking forward to this chat. So right to the point, procurement has become dysfunctional, to be very frank, because it used to, all the approaches, all the processes that currently are in place and the roles and responsibilities have been designed for a non-complex world, right? The general assumption is we can predict the future. We know what we want. We can specify what we need. And that kind of summarizes the trap that procurement is in. And to make a long story short, it's a lose-lose situation for the vendors that are bidding and are part of such acquisitions. And on the other hand, it's also a lose-lose for the buyer side. So in Switzerland, we had, it's still in the press, we had a series of big failures of public government acquisitions. As usual, defense, we're talking about huge spend. So in this case, It's about 6 billion, what they plan to spend in total on the F-35. And just to be clear and also fair, I think, the people involved, they did all their best to make this a success. But there are some constraints. Just the foundation of the constraint is, that they are applying like a hammer to everything instead of looking for a new tool for their toolbox. And there we developed something called Lean-Agile Procurement 9 years ago, who is much more suited for complex acquisitions. So for this F-35, it has become a scandal in the meanwhile, unfortunately. I have to say, I was not involved myself. So everything that I know from the news and from some reports and so on. But what I observed is, there are some repeating patterns that you could even say from the beginning that this was set up for failure, right?
Okay.
And and let's start at the very beginning. Today we have in the news, do we really still need fighter jets in modern warfare? I mean, if we look in current conflicts, for example, in Ukraine, very few fighter jets in the air. And so there the whole problem starts. So what we are looking at traditionally is in a non-government or defense environment, we would ask, what's the business case? What are the initial assumptions? What are the constraints? And if we look at the F-35 acquisition, there hasn't been an updated air defense strategy for many, many years. And so this should have been an alarming sign so that you shouldn't even have started the whole acquisition. Because what are we buying this for, right? So it could lead to, and now we are more smart, we know more, but it could lead to that, yeah, we still need fighters, but different fighter jets, but different types of, that they could onboard drones or anything else, but not in a traditional way. So I think that's at the very root cause of the problem, is that there hasn't been an alignment with a strategy, with a defense strategy in this case.
And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I hear about that a lot of national governments are still fighting the last war and they aren't planning for the new war. But I mean, I think what comes to my mind is, I work with organizations that are doing a software migration program or something, and they just do a lift and shift. And it feels like there's analogies there, because it's like, well, we'll just have the same functionality as we had before. Well, that may not be what you need going forward. And I guess that's what you're saying.
Exactly. So what we have introduced, in the procurement community, there has been the term outcome-based procurements or acquisitions since many, many years. I haven't seen it very often, to be honest.
Right.
Because defining outcomes is hard. It means that you go into interaction with, in this case, with the pilots, with the ground crew, with other stakeholders in modern warfare, even with maintenance people and so forth. And what I know about the acquisition, they have tried their best to do that. But still, my argument is, why does Switzerland need, for example, a stealth capabilities? If Switzerland is neutral, and this looks to me like a nice to have. So if we really focus on what are the core needs that this let's imagine the fighter jet is the right thing to acquire, then what I've read is, one is in during peace, we need like air police services. So a specific outcome would be the plane can intersect any foreign object or plane within a certain time. And already there, there are some rumors and also some data that the F-35 doesn't qualify for that because it's not the fastest airplane.
Oh, okay.
And so we again could argue, is this really, was this really done properly? Or was it like the result was given from the start and let's now do the acquisition to get there? That's, I was not involved, and this is a hard, maybe unfair point. Nevertheless, this leads me to the evaluation criteria. So based on the overall outcomes and more detailed outcomes, we define, based on the strategy, on the outcomes, but also other constraints, evaluation criteria for And they did. They have done that as well. And of course, there is also a commercial component to it. So in Switzerland, we had the privilege to vote, what's the maximum spend? We want to invest in that. And
Right.
the people said, the population said 6 billion, not more. So this is kind of the budget. Now they have to respect those financial constraints. Now, my argument is, if they would have done just a 15-minute market research, or even, let's say, a few weeks of reference visits in other countries that have already F-35 in service, it would have been crystal clear that this is a bottom, I don't know the English term for it. There is an endless, cost. So even you get a price indication, it costs endless because the thing is, the F-35 is still in development. Now, from an agile perspective, we could argue, of course, the product development doesn't stop, but even the U.S. Department of Defense has stopped or lowered the orders of F-35 because of the uncontrolled growth of cost. And my argument is, if that's feasible, then this shouldn't be an option, right? It's kind of a go, no-go criteria if you can't calculate.
So in this particular case, there looked like there was evidence available that the costs were likely to increase beyond the ticket price. Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, and then the last observation, there are many, many more things that we also advise to the government, and I wrote a blog post about it. Maybe we can refer the link to it. It's also a good practice if you are the buyer that you set up the legal framework, okay? Because the buyer drives the deal. Now, you could say, in this case, it's kind of the opposite. So Switzerland is a small country. The US is the biggest, power on the planet. And maybe the politicians and the negotiators were in a bad negotiation position. But also that would be against my personal opinion if there is no intention to meet at least in the middle. That will be a no-go from a legal perspective. And so what we know up till today, and then I stop, is the Swiss side thought they have signed a fixed price contract. And now they are telling stories, it was a misunderstanding. But what we know is that the contract was with the USA, and the USA subcontracted the F-35 manufacturer. And the manufacturer says, well, we can't give you the fixed price now because delivery is somewhere in 2030. Economics might be different, costs might be different per components, and so on and so on. So everything they could do was a cost indication. And so there was a term like, in the moment we deliver or before we deliver, we're going to fix the prices. And you will get similar prices to what we pay as the US Defense, Department of Defense.
So in this instance, and the deal was with Switzerland, was with the US, but not directly with Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, and in defense, this is not uncommon. So I don't have an argument about that.
No.
But I'm not sure if any of the other parties and suppliers that were involved in the bid had some similar, offers. Because what is important in government procurement is that you treat everybody equal and fair. So let's imagine for a second, I don't know, the US got a so-called fixed price, which now we know it's not. But the others had a guaranteed fixed price, and because of that, they were more expensive and lost the deal. Then it's unfair, right? So there are plenty of obvious mistakes is a hard word, but things that could have been done better. And last but not least, this took forever, several years.
Right, okay.
Right,
Right.
several years for this acquisition. And usually the argument, it's a big spend and we need to do it properly and so forth. And the result now is Switzerland has signed a contract for something they don't know what it will cost because it's in the future. It's not for now. They have signed a contract about something they actually might not need anymore because it might made sense a few years ago, but in the meanwhile we know better that fighter jets, there's still a need for it, but maybe another type would be more suitable and so forth.
Sure. I guess in defence, it's an acute problem because of the scale and the lead times of the R&D and shipment of these things. But so, in essence, you're now in a situation where it's not fixed costs. Our needs may not have been correct at the beginning, but who knows what our needs will be in 15 years' time, and we'll end up with a product that may not be helpful. So I guess it's interesting because you think about it, then you think, well, I'm sure for those involved, it started off like it was a clear idea of what they want and they had a strategy, but it just shows that things can unwind quite quickly. And I suppose traditionally in these situations, even with a contract in place that in theory covers that, as you've just articulated, there was a misunderstanding, which feels quite a soft way for think how many legal hours would have been poured over this contract. So I know you've written quite a lot about how procurement can fail and not just in defence, but anywhere. I wonder if it's worth moving on and sort of talking more generically about some of the other challenges that organisations can have around procurement and strategies that, while well desired and have a desire to be good, don't always help. What other challenges can sort of more generally can procurement organisations that are going through procurement problems using more traditional mechanisms fall into?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest challenge is that the world has changed.
Yeah.
So more demanding, faster, accelerating, changing needs, and also on the product and services side, much quicker developments, which then, goes back and forth. Faster development of the product excites the buyer side to stick to the more modern version, etc. So I think what I said at the beginning, the initial assumption, we know what we want, we can specify it, and there is kind of a transactional way to get it, is outdated. So what we need to do is, and it's interesting because the US government just announced the US BEAD Act for all future defense acquisitions, that they said the general rule of thumb is a lead time of 90 days max, no matter if it's the most complex thing or just toilet paper. And that changes everything, in my opinion. And that was also our initial assumption when we developed Lean-Agile Procurement. Instead of having a multi-months or even F-35 was a multi-year lead time, how can we do things within no time? In private sector, we sometimes just need days and hours. And so this gives a different motivation to the organizations on supplier and buyer side. And as a consequence, you have to collaborate. So instead of spending unbelievable amount of time in writing specs, which might be old the day after, you get into buyer, supplier, government, private partnership, whatever you want to call it, as soon as possible to figure out what's the art of the possible. And there are good examples. And I would even say, fighter jets, in my opinion, I'm not an expert in that, but they're almost commodity, right? It's a product. So one of the arguments or the discussion points that we have with our clients is, are we really that different? Do we really need that customization that we are asking for? So I think a lot of even huge acquisitions, we can just buy off the shelf. And what we promote also with Lean-Agile Procurement and also the US Speed Act is promoting, if you're really looking for co-innovation, so something new, then let's just start as soon as possible. Let's deliver value within a month or 3 months. And it's maybe just a 20% solution, but we're going to learn much faster than that we are trying to predict and to specify something for years. And then when we get the contract awarded and they start the production lines, it's already old.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then one last comment, what we have kind of invented with Lean-Agile Procurement is this collaboration part. So what we do we basically bring, if time is your critical metric, time to market, then you have to bring the right people together. So it could be internally, in this case, the pilots and everything that has a stake in it. But then also, as fast as possible, the players in the market. And that could be that in a very first place that you do an industry dialogue and say, look, we are aiming for the next generation, I don't know, defense system. What do you have? Where is the market leading? Just to get some ideas and have a match between the possible, the currently possible, and our needs and so forth. And what we have invented in Lean-Agile Procurement is then also to have a competitive dialogue, so that we do not just send them the specs. We still have specs.
Yeah, of course.
But that we go into a collaboration to co-create a solution design, to, if it's hardware, like in the F-35, to get at the subject, to fly the plane, to bring maintenance people to the subject, and or visit other countries that have it in service and ask them how easy is it to maintain, and so on and so on. And last but not least, to give the suppliers the opportunity to co-create their proposal together with us. So instead of having, I'm just using now the F-35 example, but it's generic. If you have a man in the middle, like in this case, it's a US state, and they are kind of then asking, the F-35 manufacturer. I'm pretty sure it was quite a close collaboration with their pre-sales and engineering, etc. I'm not sure if they had the opportunity to meet their counterparts in Switzerland. So maintenance experts talks to maintenance experts, engineer talks to engineer, cost engineer talks to cost engineer, and so on and so on. And then you get much better proposals, much more honest proposals. And there is still a risk of misunderstandings, but much less huge surprises of 80% more costs or on the timeline, prolongation, etc.
Well, we know obviously, that human-to-human conversation is great, as opposed to marking each other's homework through passing documentation backwards and forwards, which I guess is the RFP type process that we know. I think if listening to what you talked about and my observations that I've seen with clients that have gone through procurement activities, a lot of it, not necessarily the business user, but often it's the procurement part of the organization is looking to push a lot of the risk onto the supplier, and that creates a very adversarial approach. And you've talked about partnership, and I've seen so many organizations, we're in partnership with this organization, but you don't see the procurement process in place that looks like it's in partnership. You don't see the ways of working that looks like a partnership. It still looks like, well, something goes wrong, we're going to use this contract as a stick to beat the supplier. And it made me think, I mean, you talked about a lot of things are, like we said, utility, we can just buy it off the shelf. Are we that different? And as you know, I do a lot of change management for enterprises, and almost every organization thinks they're unique and special and different, and they are. But they all underlying, when you peel it back, they all have the same problems. It's just how they've applied those problems in a slightly unique way that makes them different. It also reminds me of the way you were talking about actually getting engaged really quickly and working together. I see, particularly in government, but also in enterprises, they don't necessarily see the value in learning and knowledge. And so, that you talked about, industry engaging with the client. Well, you may have to pay for that privilege, but actually the knowledge you gain reduces your downstream costs. But if you're looking at it purely from how do I pass the risk? How do I do this lowest possible cost? It doesn't drive the right behaviors, does it?
No, definitely not. And you raised a few important points here. So first of all, kudos to all the procurement professionals out there. It's not your fault. No, really. I mean that with all my heart. If you think about it, we used to have quality assurance departments in software. Today, we have DevOps, like cross-functional teams or team of teams organized around a joint vision, product, mission, whatsoever. Now, in procurement is still a separate service and department. And if we look fast forward and also what some of our clients do, the future is that it's not about the acquisition, it's about the product development. No matter if it's a public service, product acquisition, doesn't matter. So who owns it? That's the key question in the business. And this person, this organization, this team, it's very often just a few people, should also drive everything that is related to it. And procurement becomes a capability we need to onboard into this product, partnership development, etc. Now, you mentioned something interesting. Traditionally we are kind of delegating all the risk and so forth. And also there's nothing wrong about it. There are still cases where we should do that. It's not always about partnership. It's not always co-innovation, but it has to be clear on the buyer side in the first place, and then we have to make it explicit that this is an outsourcing case. You take all the risk, and hey, we understand if you have to take all the risk, then the prices will be higher, for example. The other thing is, all of this, we are focusing more on the collaboration, co-innovation, strategic partnerships. And in terms of, are we so different? We got famous for sourcing an ERP system in just 2 days. So the benchmark is 12 months.
Oh, wow, that's quite a difference.
So to be fair, 2 days is a little bit marketing. We had the prep time. So the whole lead time was 4 weeks, but still
substantial an improvement over 12 months.
Quite a good improvement.
Yeah.
And what we did, we set up a cross-functional team where the head of finance, he said, well, the ERP is my baby. It's his mission. I know exactly where we are heading with that. So he became the product owner of that, the service owner. He already was. They said, well, the acquisition, I can't delegate that. I mean, I want to be in the driver's seat of that. So we formed a cross-functional team consisting of HR, finance, IT, procurement, and so forth to drill down from his vision, what are the needs, the processes we approach, the technical environment, et cetera, in less than 4 weeks. And everything was outcome-based. So we were able to specify everything in I think it was less than 100 needs. For an ERP system, it's quite just a minimum, right? And In terms of are we so different, why I'm telling the story? So there are two things that are quite interesting. One was we didn't start the acquisition before we had all the department heads on board. Okay, so we aligned, what's the bigger outcomes, the constraints, and so on. And one of the constraints was there was this functionality of, we have over-customized the old system. So I came up with the idea, what if we introduce a policy, no customizing? So let's see what the system is capable to do in the first place. And that could lead to, upside down process steps. But maybe that's even better than what we have today.
Sure. So go in with your eyes open.
So let's look at that in the first place. And then if we are really special, then we can start thinking about customizing, but not the other way around. So that was a huge improvement also for the specs and efforts and everything. And then the other thing is, if you're going a direction of outcome-based specification and collaboration and partnership, we used 2 days to have 3 vendors simultaneously in the same room to co-create their proposals. And we asked them, we did our best to do the outcome-based specification, but you are the experts. Did we miss something important? Do you have something that that could be more beneficial to us? Is what some of the needs or even constraints or some of our objectives a huge cost driver for you? So it's instead of having this transactional nature of you mentioned RFP, specifications written in stone, you can't change it, you can just propose to it. We go in and say, hey, look, this is the best knowledge we have. Let's have a conversation about it. First, in the first place, it's important to us that you understand what we want. There starts the problem. And then the second step, we want to have a conversation about you. What's your solution to it? Your service, product, hardware, doesn't matter what. And we want to figure out, is this a good match? Sometimes, there are some ideas written down as specs that are just ideas, but the vendors don't know. And it's a huge cost driver and they lose the bid just because of that. So that's the power of that and the collaboration. And I think we haven't talked about that is also, to me, at least 50% of it is also to find the right people.
Okay. But within the organization or the vendor or both?
Both.
Right.
So we have a multi-company, multi-organization, match that we are doing. So it's a business match. So can we afford it? Is it the right service tool and so on? That stays as in a traditional tender. But what we add to that is also a social and culture fit. So sometimes we have the right expertise. We have the product is great, but the vendor, they are just assholes. Right?
Sure.
And to deal with complexity, if you want to go into co-innovation, this becomes a success factor.
Yeah, because people need to work together, don't they? So is that cultural fit is really, really important. Yeah. And I've seen great people who are maybe not arseholes, but very confident, just didn't get on. And we need to build teams and architect the organization as much as we architect our solution. If we move on now, we've talked about, a particular case and some of the challenges. If someone's listening to this and they're going to be doing some procurement going forward and are a business leader, what advice would you give them to think differently about how they could go do that with the experiences and recommendations you've got from the Lean-Agile Procurement?
Well, I think you nailed it a few sentences before. We are all people, right? We are all humans. So I would start there. Usually if somebody, especially in the business, gets the task, do this procurement or look for this new service, etc., the motivation drops and say, no, not that bureaucratic thing, right? And then they start, their own specification project. And then last but not least, they involve, procurement and then legal and so forth and so forth. My recommendation is involve them from the start. They will appreciate it very much. They will bring another point of view to the table. They have a commercial view, right? But that's their role, right? So why do you want to spend so much? Isn't there a better solution? So you don't have to take the feedback, but it's valuable. And they have a lot of experience, right? And then the other thing is definitely, sounds a little bit selfish, look up what we have done. Because with Lean-Agile Procurement, it's kind of a cookbook, right? We have good practices that just make sense and learn from that, get inspired. But there's one warning, every case is different. So do not just copy paste, get inspired and apply to your context what makes sense.
Sure. So other than involving people early, what other advice would you give to someone thinking about how to do procurement better? I mean, you talked about obviously applying the principles sensibly. And I'm a firm believer, a colleague of mine once said many years ago, and I've stolen this many times, an intelligent customer makes an intelligent supplier. How could you, based on your practices and recommendations, how do you encourage organizations to be that intelligent customer?
It's a great question. Maybe let's start there, that you accept and also articulate that you don't know, but you don't know.
Right, yeah.
I think it starts there. There is still this assumption and behavior, but we are the customer. We need to know, we need to specify. You have like glossy slides and, everything is set in stone. So that's why we have developed, for example, the Lean Procurement Canvas.
Okay.
And if you put stickies on it, it's more likely accepted that this is a living document and people understand this is a draft or version 0.9. Instead, if you have it in PowerPoint, if you have it in a Word document, it looks like we're done, right? We know it.
It's fact.
It's facts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and then the other thing is, I just had a webinar these days about agile contracts, or contractual frameworks that enable collaboration and co-innovation, can phrase it this way. And one substantial thing that is needed is trust. Now, trust doesn't come overnight or just because I like you or so. I'm a strong believer you have to develop trust. Early involvement helps to develop trust. On the other hand, there are plenty of mind shifts, but one of the biggest mind shifts is if we manage risk, and we have touched on risk, if we still think that we have to manage all the risk via the contract, there is no trust. And the vendors will recognize that. So also the legal side of a partnership need to change, beside the fact that, we need to have more adaptive and flexible contracts that we can change, the focus of our partnership. Still, there are clauses like exit clauses or what if things go wrong and so on. And we have to talk about all of that, but in a different sense that we do it today. So we say, look, I don't know what we don't know. You don't know what we don't know. Let's have a chat about how we're going to rule it. Maybe we can rule it with a more closer collaboration or some governance that makes sure that we have a strategic alignment, much closer and not just write it down into the contract. I think that, I would say, it makes not just the buyer side more intelligent and attracts also more intelligent suppliers. If you're looking for just a transactional relationship, intelligence doesn't really matter.
No, indeed.
That is just about the transaction. Can you deliver in time, quality, and within the agreed price? if there is, and very often it's not 100% co-innovation, that's maybe in R&D once in a while. But often there it's just, 80% is clear and we have 20% that is unclear, or we have some hypothesis and so on. But I think that, I would say, is very important to foster, collaboration and co-innovation.
It reminds me, when you were talking about, particularly about trust, many moons ago, I worked for a digital agency, and they had a process when they were doing agile projects, which seemed to work quite nicely, is that, yes, they would have a contract and a purchase order for the number of iterations they thought they needed, but they had very short exit criteria. And so this is how we demonstrate the fact that the trust is that if you don't like us, you can tell us to go very quickly. You're not committed. Yeah. And it creates that shared responsibility to go forward. And I think sort of echoes what you're talking about. So Mirko, this has been great. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm convinced we could spend hours talking about this, and I'm sure we could. If people are interested in learning more about Lean-Agile Procurement and reaching out to you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so our first stop would be our website, lap-alliance.org. And what we also do is, I do a lot of inspiring talks. So there are a lot of, videos on YouTube, but I'm also happy if you have a complex acquisition ahead, I'm happy to get in touch and also have a conversation about it. We are also offering certification courses to, get to know this new tool for your toolbox, as I called it. And the certification, so the LAP Alliance is a certification body. So we have a global group of trainers that could support on that. So it's not just me. And then look up our website. There are great cases from public sector, private sector, highly regulated industries. There's always this argument, that might work in private sector, but we are government procurement. So, well, you better don't work in pharma or banking, where they have even more restricted constraints, rules and regulations. And our approach works even there. And the good news is we are always compliant. So you don't need to change your current processes, tools, and so on. It's just the way we work is differently, but traceability, everything is guaranteed. And it's just faster, better results, happier, people on either side. So
what's not to like?
It's a win-win-win, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which doesn't feel like a lot of people's experience of procurement of old. So, Mirko, thank you very much for your time today. It's been much appreciated. Great conversation, and we'll put those links in as well into the show notes for people.
Thank you so much for having me, Glenn.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I've had fun making it. I'd be thrilled to hear your feedback or suggestions for topics you'd like me to explore. Email the show at podcast@nimbility.co. You can also check out all the other episodes in the series at nimbility.co/podcast. If you've enjoyed the content, it would mean a lot to us if you could subscribe and rate the show in your podcast app. Your support helps others discover the show and allows us to keep spreading the word. So until next time, thanks for listening.